Det är Mao Zedong, tjäna folket. Och det är Lyndon Johnsons, tjäna pengar. Och vi måste välja mellan dessa två ideologier, annars kommer vi inte ha någon framgång.
Störta hela institutionen som sådan. För under nedrivning så kommer uppbygget. Vi kommer att enas i kampen. Det här jävla förtrycket som har rått, det är nog med det.
Om det här hade varit på 30-talet i Tyskland hade jag nog blivit en helgjuten liten nasse.
This is Eric, sitting in a cafe in the campus district in Lund, Sweden. He's been invited to a meeting with Olaf, a notable figure in the Swedish left-wing student movement of the 1960s. Olaf explains that he is in the process of forming an organization of military malingerers and conscientious objectors. He wants to recruit Eric to infiltrate the Lund Academic Officers Society.
Olaf wanted me to sneak inside, hide in a closet and listen in on their warmongering. I said I needed to think about it. Getting caught at 20, hiding in a closet didn't really appeal to me. That was my first brush with the United FNL Groups. Looking back on it, I guess the stupidity started right there.
Enligt USAs egen definition ska varje väsen, idé eller person, varje havande kvinna och varje lekande barn betraktas som militära mål.
Så Nixon skickar leksaker till Indokinas barn. Små bomber som har formats till bollar och till löv. Och barnet som vill leka och tar upp en i sin hand får hela armen söndersliten av en explosion.
Enligt USAs egen definition ska varje väsen.
In the ideological aftershock of 1968, as Western students cheered Mao from campus rooftops and waved communist manuals like relics, Sweden produced its own hardline political curiosity, KFMLR, the Communist League Marxist-Leninist Revolutionaries, a name as clunky as their worldview and just as uncompromising. If the Swedish left-wing party was the elderly uncle still toasting Stalin at family dinners, KFMLR was the militant nephew denouncing him for not going far enough. Founded in 1970, the KFMLR was a splinter group from the already extreme KFML, a Maoist breakaway from the Swedish Left Party. The parent party was considered too soft, too reformist and, worst of all, too accommodating to parliamentary politics. KFMLR wasn't interested in socialism with a Swedish accent. It wanted revolution, full stop. In their eyes, Sweden wasn't a social democracy. It was a capitalist dictatorship, propped up by NATO, the bourgeois media and class traitors on the left.
The endless influx of political acronyms, new groups breaking away over disagreements, was typical of the entire movement. In truth, we all shared pretty much the same worldview, but we insisted on feeling divided, like oil and water, simply because the group next door didn't match our mindset down to the last detail. You happily get in line with the political views held by the organizations. Rigid, black-and-white narratives that left no room for nuance or independent thought. To be clear, this included me as well. I was fully immersed in it. I'm not gonna lie, I love the atmosphere.
A couple of days after the meeting in the cafe with Olaf, Eric is contacted again.
Olaf told me his organisation planned to disrupt an officers' meeting that evening. I said I needed to study and couldn't find a time. Later, I heard that some members tried to attend the meeting, only to be chased off by a group of drunk paratroopers on leave. I suppose Olaf and the others decided it wasn't the ideal moment to interrupt their warmongering, but I have no idea if the story is true or not. I never heard from Olaf or the organisation again. Last I heard, Olaf had become some sort of revolutionary librarian. Back then, libraries were less about serving the patrons and cataloguing and more about brainstorming ideas for a left-wing takeover of the government.
De synpunkterna till kommittén. Vi snackar med kommittén. Vi vet ju inte vilka de är än. Vi har snackat med dem.
Vem är kommittén? Vem sitter kommittén?
Kommittén är inte tillsatt ännu.
The KFMLR's guiding star was Chairman Mao Zedong, whose bloody cultural revolution in China was not a cautionary tale, but a blueprint. While most of the left was starting to sober up to the horrors of Stalinism, KFMLR doubled down, insisting that true socialism required permanent revolution, not compromise. They admired Albania under Enver Hoxha, a regime so paranoid it turned the entire country into a bunker. Hoxha's brand of isolationist, anti-revisionist Marxism became the ideological core of KFMLR, long after it had been abandoned even by other Maoist movements. Eric continues to mingle with the revolutionaries and left-wing crowd at Lund University.
It was a great time. The entire campus buzzed with political talk and debate. There were meeting rooms everywhere, each occupied by different groups and organizations, all trying to outdo one another by being more revolutionary than the rest.
Nu kliar Nix, strängar sina skallar och hans experter jobbar för sitt liv och hans datorer kläcker teorier. Vad är väl hemligheten bakom folkets offensiv?
One day, as Eric is walking down a corridor in the campus district, he notices a door with a sign beside it that simply reads South Africa. A staunch supporter of the South Africa Solidarity movement, he peeks inside and sees that a meeting is just about to begin.
The room was packed, easily 100 people crammed inside. Every chair was taken, others sat shoulder to shoulder on the floor like sardines, and more lined the walls. I settled down on the floor in the middle of the room. After a while, a speaker rose behind the podium and began talking. I don't remember much of what was said, but after the opening remarks, the man launched into a lengthy praise of Mao Zedong. It quickly became apparent I stumbled into the wrong meeting.
Not wanting to be considered an enemy of the people during his first week at the university, he decides to sit it out.
Well, communists don't exactly wrap things up in a hurry. That's part of the package. If you're a communist, you sit down and listen to speeches. This one only took 2 hours. Politically, the KFMLR was irrelevant from the beginning.
They rejected electoral politics as bourgeois theatre, which conveniently spared them the embarrassment of never winning votes. Instead, they focused on agitation in working-class neighbourhoods and factories, distributing leaflets and staging small protests. They spoke of arming the workers, overthrowing the state and building a dictatorship of the proletariat, as if Gothenburg in the 1970s were Petrograd in 1917. They published a paper called The Proletarian, a grim little publication stuffed with slogans, denunciations and recycled dogma. If a factory closed, it was a plot by capital. If a union leader compromised, he was a traitor. If Sweden held democratic elections, they were a sham. There was no nuance, only the revolution, constantly postponed but always righteous.
Och vallarna som skyddar när vattnet bryter fram är sånt som ska förstöras av Nixons krigsmaskin.
De riktar sina vapen mot en hel natur, fäller sina bomber mot människor och djur. Bostadshus och skolor, kvinnor, män och barn. Det är vad de menar med militära mål.
The rhetoric was always more or less militant and aggressive. Most of the people I encountered held these militant political views to varying degrees, myself included, but I never encountered the screaming, ranting, look-at-me types you see today. Back then, yelling in someone's face wasn't considered a bold act of political awareness.
The KFMLR had a near-pathological obsession with ideological purity. Internal purges were routine. Members were expelled for deviationism at the drop of a hat. You either towed the line or you were labelled a revisionist, a Trotskyist, or worse, a social democrat. KFMLR turned factionalism into an art form, splintering even further into microscopic groups with even more unreadable acronyms. Their support for regimes abroad reads like a travel brochure for the world's most repressive states. North Korea was held up as a brave holdout against imperialism, its Orwellian reality dismissed as Western lies. China under Mao was the gold standard, even as it descended into chaos and famine. Albania, poor, backward, and hermetically sealed from the world, was praised as the last bastion of real socialism.
Yeah, we held Enver Hoxha in high esteem. He was onto something, probably negative in hindsight. I can't quite remember what now, but he sure did love his bunkers. I heard the country ran out of concrete after 170,000 of them were built. At least they'll last forever, I guess. Shame the Cold War aesthetic didn't stick around past the 90s.
Even when these regimes collapsed or self-imploded, KFMLR, now renamed the Communist Party, refused to admit fault. Instead, they rebranded failures as betrayals or not true socialism. They remained frozen in time, the political equivalent of a cult refusing to admit the prophecy didn't come true, simply pushing the date of the revolution a few decades further.
It's true, to some extent, that the excuse it wasn't true communism was used by hardliners to protect their ideology as one totalitarian regime after another came crashing down. Like everyone else, people tend to overlook the mistakes made by individuals and systems aligned with their own political beliefs. Although mistakes in this context often meant mass murder, extreme oppression and poverty. Like I said, I left that part of my life behind a long time ago.
By the 2020s, the Communist Party had become a fringe party in the most literal sense. A few hundred aging diehards, a youth wing with more slogans than members, and a political program that reads like a photocopy of 1970s poll mix. They still refuse to participate in national elections. They still denounce the Left Party as traitors. They still speak in the dead language of class struggle with the same robotic cadence of Cold War pamphlets. Sweden, for all its progressivism, has always had a curious tolerance for ideological eccentrics. In that context, KFMLR and its hardened sclerotic successor serves as a reminder. There are few things more absurd than people who mistake dogma for clarity and irrelevance for integrity. As for Eric, he left the movement in the 70s, taking with him a bitter aftertaste.
Looking back, everything revolved around which leader was to be praised and which was to be despised. The groupthink was absolute and bizarre. I held those views too, mind you. At first, I didn't notice it, but later I realized the group's position on every aspect didn't align with mine, as it shouldn't. That's not healthy. Moreover, it didn't align with everyone else's views either. But we chose to brainwash ourselves, to get in line. The mentality of the group becomes a single organism, and it happens quickly if you're prone to that kind of personality. I was, but I'm ashamed to admit.
According to Eric, several members of ultra-left organizations suffered long-term consequences due to their involvement in political sects. They were blacklisted from certain jobs, monitored by the security service, and in some cases became estranged from their families, all as a result of political dogma gone haywire.
Many people involved later felt embarrassed by their participation in these organizations. One former Mao supporter even claimed that had he been born in Germany during the Nazi era, he probably would have supported Adolf Hitler. Said it outright on national television during a show about the left-wing movement in Sweden in the 60s and 70s. His political drive was fueled by grand visions, a sense of collective purpose, and the possibility of influencing major social change. He and others had been discussing their support for Mao and the atrocities committed in China, but when this guy admitted he could have been a Nazi, the host responded, "You think so?" As if the host hadn't just spent the last 30 minutes listening to him record his past praise for another horrific dictator. What bothered me wasn't the admission itself, but the selective reaction, a moment that, in my view, perfectly captured the contradictions of that era. The notion that people today would so obviously be against Hitler if they'd been brought up in Germany during the time of Nazism, well, I'm not even going to comment on that stupidity. The chance that most of us would have stood on that parade square is pretty likely. Scary thought, but if you lose yourself to the crowd in politics, things like that can happen fast, and it will often seem completely normal and ordinary unless you're able to step back, regain your judgment, and ask yourself, how the hell did I end up here?